Hey, it's the preacher, and it's time for another episode of Cool Old Stuff. And I started this series with this exact cool old item in mind. In order to make the criteria of my little series Cool Old Stuff, it has to be old, and I get to determine old. It's my series, it's my video, it's my stuff. And I think old is anything that's as old as I am. And, you know, for some things, hey, if that's a ham sandwich and it's 40 years old, 44 years old, that's pretty old for a ham sandwich. So, what it is will determine whether it's old or not. What I have here is about 75 years old. So, it's old enough to meet the criteria, and it needs to be cool. And I think in order for something to be cool, it has to have a story behind it. How I acquired it, how they made it, you know, something like this. We did the aeronautical survival kit. That was just cool because the guy that had it was a World War II bomber pilot. And this was his private survival kit in his own private plane. So, I've got some cool old stuff here today. And I want to give you the story behind it, and then I'll tell you and show you what it is. So, I was probably 14 or 15 when I acquired this, and we have a good family friend. He's still a good friend of ours who did lawn care, and he'd done lawn care. His dad did lawn care. He'd been lawn care all his life, and he, you know, took care of a lot of businesses, factories, houses, and one of the factories he took care of had a pretty wealthy owner. And he took care of the owner's home. And matter of fact, one of my first summer jobs was working with him. And we would go and clean this guy's house, or not his house, clean up his yard and mow. And I remember one time one of his kids were getting married. And he prayed our family friend to sit out there and light candles and put them in boats until the whole swimming pool was covered in floating candles. So it was really cool. You know, the guy was a pretty wealthy man, a successful businessman. Well, he had a bunch of stuff he wanted to get rid of, and he didn't want to have a yard sale and have people up there walking around his garage. So he just paid our family friend who did his yard care. He said, "Would you haul this stuff to the dump for me?" And he's looking at it, and he's going, "Man, this is all good stuff." He said, "Well, I don't care. I just want it gone." So our friend's grabbing up, I mean, we're talking about TVs and radios, and yeah, they're not the nicest, newest thing, you know, in 1990? But they still work. And he's like, "I'm not going to throw this away." He said, "I don't care." He said, "I'm going to set it out here. It's your job to haul it off." So he shows up at my mom and dad's house. And he's like, "Hey, do y'all need a little TV for the camper?" And they're like, "Yeah." So we got this little, you remember when the little TVs were portable and you could carry them around. So we had this little portable TV. Seems like we had a couple of fans, you know, oscillating fans, box fans. Anyways, he says, "Hey, I got a fly rod that your son will want." He's telling this to my dad. And my dad's like, "Oh, well, okay." Well, you know, I wasn't a big fly fisherman, but I would go up to the pond occasionally with some poppers and, you know, catch perch and bass. And he said, "Yeah, it's a fly rod." So my dad picks up this case, and before he could open it, hey, you want this? And so he just sets this down in the corner of the garage. And he says, so I come home, he says, "Hey," he says, "Merle left you a fly rod out there." And I'm, you know, tells me the whole story. The guy's throwing all this stuff away. Merle didn't want to throw it in the trash. Thought you would want a fly rod. So I go out there and I pick up this case. And here it is. I mean, you can get an idea. This is probably a good 4 foot long. And I'm thinking it's a fly rod. So I'm like, wow, that looks like an old one, you know. So I unzip it. It's just a little leather case with an unzip it. But as soon as I unzip it, I'm like, that ain't no fly rod. So I get a hold of it, and I'm going to give you the treatment that I got. I start trying to fish this thing out of here like this, and I'm like, this is an old antique. This is an old antique reel. I've never seen anything like it. At the time, I've never seen anything like it. So I'm like, well, that's cool. So I call him up, and I'm like, "Hey, this ain't no fly rod. This is some kind of antique reel. You sure?" "Oh, I don't want it. I don't want it. You can have it. I'm never going to use it. You can have it." So I'm thinking I found the rainbow's end, right? So I pull out the rod, And as I get the rod out, I really get an idea for how old it is. The rod is all metal. And I mean, it's just limber as it can be. And I'm thinking, okay, the reel is inline. I'll give you a close-up of this in a little bit. So the rod is grooved where it only fits in here one way, right at the front. And it slides in. And so now you've got your inline, and this thing was still spooled with this black braided line. I'm guessing probably, it's got a level wind. I'm guessing this is probably some of the original line. So anyways, I've got this cool old metal rod. I mean, the pistol grips are walnut. I've never seen anything like it. This is before the internet, okay? So how do you find out what something like this is worth? Well, I'll tell you what I did. I went down to the most reputable independent tackle shop in our area, and I said, hey, I've got this really old antique reel and I'd like to know what it's worth. And the guy, you know, here's the story. I'm sure you do. It's old Grandpa's rod, you know. So anyways, he says, bring it in. Let's look at it. And he says, I deal in these a lot. I can tell you what it's worth. So I go out to the truck. I get the case. I carry it in. He's looking. He's like, I've never seen anything like this. And he said, I'd like to buy it off of you. And I said, well, I don't know as though I want to sell it. I don't know what it's worth. So he says, I've got an old magazine over here, an old catalog that appraises these. So he opens it up. We look for it. It's got the name on there. It says Hurd Super Caster, Detroit, Michigan. So he looks this up in his master catalog of vintage fishing equipment. Keep in mind, this is like 1990. It shows a price range of $27 to $45. And he said, wow, I would have thought it'd been worth more than that, but I'm willing to give you $45 for it. And I'm looking at this thing going, there's no way this thing's worth $45. And I'm like, are you sure? He goes, yeah, look right here in my catalog. It's my dealer's catalog. He spins the catalog around, shows it to me. $27.50 to $45 even is the value they assign the Hurd Super Caster. This is all metal. This is cast aluminum. This is a titanium aluminum paddles on the crank. This is a checkered walnut handle. I'm like, there's no way this is worth 45 bucks. And it's kind of like the old pawn shop guy, you know, well, $45 best I can do. I didn't want to sell it anyways. But I thought, man, that just sounds cheap. So I stuck it in the corner of my bedroom closet. And I got married, I stuck it in the corner of my closet. I got, about 10 years ago, I thought, you know what, I'm going to look that up. This thing ain't worth $45. And maybe it was back then. But here's the real story on this. I think the guy at the tackle shop was trying to get it for $45. Here's why. Let me take this out of here. Here's why. This originally sold in 1946. This originally sold for $45. Do you know what $45 would buy in 1946? There was another one with plastic grips instead of walnut, not as fancy. It sold for $27.50, which still would be the Cadillac of fishing reels. I think what he was offering me was the original sale price of it from 1945. So I looked this up. I see the old ads. Yeah, you can get this in 1945 for $45. In good condition, with the original case, it brings just over $200 today. So, still, not like the Rainbow's End, but $200. It either appreciated a lot since 1990, or he was trying to get it pretty cheap in 1990. So let me tell you a little bit about it. The interesting thing about these is this was made by the Hurd Lock and Manufacturing Company. They made locks. They were a locksmith company, okay? They also made watch parts from what I could understand. So this thing was engineered and built and designed to last forever, have just impeccable workmanship, and it was really designed to be a rod and reel that would last forever. And so that's why they used the aluminum housing. Everything in it's metal. The spool may be the only plastic piece on it. Anyways, this is American walnut that's checkered. Here's the interesting thing. These are brass screws that are holding it in, by the way. Here's the cool thing about it. This little steel rod is a World War II surplus Abrams tank antenna. Yes, you heard that right. They, in Detroit, Michigan, their factory was right next to, Champ's in here wanting some attention. Their factory was near the armory that made the tanks for World War II. And they went in business right after World War II, and they bought these antennas, which is why they're limber as they can be. You could probably never break it or bend it. But they used tank antennas as their rod, and they just simply had a groove in the bottom, which they lined up with their real housing and slid right in. So it makes for a great story, a great piece of America. I just think it's a cool old story. Now let me bring you in close, and I'll show you some of the features and how it works. And this one's not in perfect condition. There's a little green paint right here, probably got something on it. But I mean, overall, to be 80 years old, I think this thing is in top shape. And it's just as smooth. It reels just as smooth. Has a drag on the side. Here, I'll bring you in close and we'll look at it. Alright, here we go. This thing is in free spool mode, so it would allow the line to be taken out. If you wanted to slow the line from being taken out, you would push this button, which would enact the drag and make it harder to pull out. You can adjust that drag right here. You can tighten it or loosen it, and that loosens the free spool and increases the difficulty in stripping line out. The level wind, which you can see here, works right just like it's supposed to. Now, if we loosen this back off, you'll also notice there's a bait click on here. Now you can tell if you're getting a bite, or you can annoy people every time you reel it in. But man, when I look at the craftsmanship of this, I mean that full tang handle there, just like you would have on a quality knife. Serial number right here on the bottom. And from all the looking that I could do and all the study that I could do, they weren't in order. The first year started somewhere in the low digits and went to 1,000. Mine is a 52,041, I think, something like that. But that's no indication of age. It's very, have a little green paint here, but just very, very high quality. I can't get over it. I mean, if you could just feel the way it feels. Anyways, let's put it on the rod, and I'll lay it all out and give you a look at the whole thing and a closer look at the case. Well, there you have it with the rod in it. Here's the case. As you can see, it's a little dusty from sitting in my closet all these years, but everything still works. Zips up, seals up. I think if I wipe the dust off, you could really tell. There's the reel, and the rod slides right in that top. I didn't cram it in for the last 1/4 inch because it's hard to get out if you do. So here's a close-up of the eyes tied in with that two-tone. Of course, you get down to the end. No subliminal messages here. Just a classic rod. It's just an American rod, made in America. Just trying to give you guys a look at this rod. I'm not trying to influence you in any way. Just trying to show you some cool old stuff. Some of the stuff that made America great. I'll give you a close-up of that case.